Two countries, no shared border, no direct colonial past. And yet, Iran and Israel are now in open war. For decades, this conflict played out in the shadows. Proxy militias, assassinations, cyber attacks. Wars fought through other people's countries, on other people's soil. Experts had been warning about direct confrontation for years. What nobody saw coming was how quickly it would actually happen. To understand this moment, you can't start in 2024. You can't even start in 1979. You have to go back over 100 years to a dying empire, a nation born in fire, and a revolution that rewired the entire Middle East. The world that didn't exist yet. At the turn of the 20th century, there was no Israel. There was no modern Iran as we know it. The entire Middle East was under the thumb of the Ottoman Empire, a vast Islamic superpower that had dominated the region for more than 600 years. But by 1900, that empire was rotting from the inside. Military defeats, corruption, and rebellion had brought it to its knees. Then came World War I. The Ottomans backed Germany. When Germany lost in 1918, the Ottomans lost everything. Britain and France moved in immediately and did something that would haunt the region for the next century. They drew borders, not borders based on culture, religion, or ethnicity, borders based on what was convenient for them. Britain took control of a territory called Mandatory Palestine, a strip of land on the eastern Mediterranean, home to a majority Arab Muslim population, a Christian Arab minority, and a small but rapidly growing Jewish community. This is where the fuse was lit. Two peoples, one land for centuries. Jewish communities across Europe had lived under persecution, pogroms in Russia, institutional discrimination across the continent. Out of that suffering grew a movement called Zionism, built on one central idea. Jewish people needed a homeland of their own, a place where they could never be persecuted again. That place, Zionists argued, should be Palestine, the ancient biblical homeland of the Jewish people. Britain made promises to everyone during World War I. They promised Arab leaders independence in exchange for revolting against the Ottomans. And through the Balfour Declaration of 1917, they promised Jewish leaders British support for a homeland in Palestine. The problem? Those promises directly contradicted each other. Britain knew it. They did it anyway. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Jewish immigration to Palestine accelerated, especially as Adolf Hitler rose to power in Europe and persecution intensified. Arab Palestinians watched the demographics of their homeland shift before their eyes. Tensions turned to violence. Britain found itself stuck between two peoples with claims to the same land that couldn't both be satisfied. Then came the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish people systematically murdered by Nazi Germany. The world was horrified. International pressure for a Jewish homeland became impossible to ignore. Britain, exhausted and broken by World War II, handed the problem to the United Nations and walked away. The birth of Israel and the catastrophe. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. Within hours, the United States recognized it. The Soviet Union followed. The Arab world reacted with fury. The very next day, 5 Arab armies, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, invaded. Their stated goal, to destroy the new state before it could take hold. Israel survived. Against almost every military prediction, not only did it survive, it expanded, ending the war controlling more territory than the UN partition plan had originally allocated. For Israelis, this was the War of Independence, a miracle, the fulfillment of a 2,000-year dream. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. Entire villages were erased. A refugee crisis was created that has never been resolved. Now, where was Iran in all of this? In 1948, Iran was a constitutional monarchy, not an Arab country, Persian. It had no direct stake in the Palestinian cause the way Arab nations did. And crucially, Iran under its king, the Shah, actually had relatively normal diplomatic relations with Israel. The two countries cooperated on intelligence and military matters, So how did Iran go from quiet neighbor to Israel's most dangerous enemy on earth? The answer lies in one of the most dramatic political upheavals of the 20th century, the revolution that changed everything. Through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was a modernizer, pushing Western-style reforms, expanding women's rights, industrializing the country. He was pro-American, anti-communist, and seen by Washington as a crucial regional ally. But underneath the surface, something was building. In 1951, Iran's parliament elected a new prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, a hugely popular democratic nationalist with one defining mission: take back control of Iran's oil industry from the British, who had been extracting Iranian oil for decades while ordinary Iranians saw almost nothing. He nationalized the oil industry. Britain was furious. America was alarmed. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence launched a covert operation, codenamed Operation Ajax. They paid gangs to create chaos in Tehran, bribed military officers, orchestrated mass protests. Within days, Mossadegh's government collapsed. He was arrested. The Shah was flown back and restored to power, now more dependent on America than ever. For America and Britain, it was a strategic win. Iranian oil was safe. A pro-Western government was back in control. For Iranians, it was something else entirely. Underneath the surface, Iranian society was reaching a boiling point. In 1979, it exploded. Mass protests swept the country. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. Almost overnight, everything changed. And then something happened that made reconciliation almost impossible. 444 days. In November 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 52 diplomats hostage. They were held for 444 days. The crisis destroyed any real chance of Iran-US reconciliation for a generation. And Iran's hostility toward Israel, America's closest regional ally, hardened into permanent doctrine. In September 1980, with Iran weakened by revolution and international isolation, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein invaded. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 brutal years. More than 1 million people died. America and much of the West quietly backed Iraq. First, it convinced Iran's revolutionary leadership that they could never rely on outside support. They needed their own advanced military capabilities. That thinking would eventually drive Iran's nuclear program. Second, it deepened Iran's strategy of supporting proxy militias across the region, groups that could fight Iran's enemies without Iran ever having to fight directly. The most powerful of these was Hezbollah, a Shia militant group founded in Lebanon in 1982 with direct Iranian support, weapons, training, and money. Its stated purpose: resistance against Israel. Iran had found a way to wage war on Israel without firing a single shot from Iranian soil. The proxy strategy was born. The shadow war through the 1990s and 2000s, Iran steadily developed its nuclear program, officially claiming it was for civilian energy. Israel and the West didn't buy it. A nuclear-armed Iran, an ideologically hostile regime that openly called for Israel's destruction, was for Israel an existential threat. Israel's response was aggressive and covert. Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in operations widely attributed to Israeli intelligence. The Stuxnet computer virus, believed to be a joint U.S.-Israeli creation, was used to physically destroy Iranian nuclear centrifuges. Iran responded by expanding its proxy network: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian-backed militias across Iraq and Syria, a ring of armed groups surrounding Israel on every side, all funded, trained, and armed by Tehran. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, briefly offered a way out. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for lifting international sanctions. Israel furiously opposed it. In 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal. Iran, stripped of the sanctions relief the deal had promised, gradually abandoned its own commitments and accelerated its nuclear program. The world ended up in a worse position than before the deal had ever existed. The gloves come off through the 2000s, 2010s, and into the 2020s, Iran and Israel fought what analysts called a shadow war, a continuous, low-level conflict conducted through assassinations, cyber attacks, airstrikes, and proxy forces. Never direct, never acknowledged, always deniable. Then came September 2024, and one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history. Israeli intelligence had spent years setting up a shell company in Hungary to manufacture pagers for Hezbollah. They secretly packed the batteries with explosives. On September 17th, thousands of pagers exploded simultaneously across Lebanon and Syria. 42 people killed, over 4,000 injured. The following day, walkie-talkies exploded in a second wave. 1,500 Hezbollah fighters were taken out of action in a single coordinated operation. It was described as the biggest security breach in Hezbollah's history. Days later, Israel delivered an even more devastating blow. They knew he was meeting with senior commanders in an underground bunker, 60 feet below a residential apartment block in the Dahieh suburb of Beirut. On September 27, 2024, the Israeli Air Force struck 80 bombs in a single coordinated wave. The bunker was obliterated. The apartment blocks above it collapsed entirely. Nasrallah was killed, along with several senior Hezbollah commanders and an Iranian Revolutionary Guard general who had been sent personally by Khamenei to warn Nasrallah his life was in danger. Iran's ring of proxies, built over decades at enormous cost, was being dismantled piece by piece, the point of no return. Earlier in 2024, Israel bombed the Iranian consulate annex in Damascus, killing 2 Iranian generals and 7 senior ERGC officers. Striking a diplomatic mission was widely seen as a major escalation, a crossing of a serious red line. Iran retaliated on April 13th with over 300 drones and missiles, its first ever direct attack on Israeli soil. Israel and its allies intercepted 99% of them. Then in October, Iran launched a second missile attack, citing Israel's assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the killing of Nasrallah in Beirut, and the death of senior IRGC commander Abbas Nilforoushan. This is a crucial point for understanding this conflict fairly. Every Iranian attack in 2024 was framed as a direct response to an Israeli action. Whether you accept that justification or not, and many don't, the sequence matters. Neither side in this conflict has clean hands. Israel struck back, destroying much of Iran's air defense network and demonstrating it could strike deep inside Iranian territory, essentially at will. Iran was now facing a choice: watch its entire regional strategy collapse or escalate directly. October 7th. We cannot tell this story without it. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas, funded and armed by Iran, launched the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. 1,200 Israelis killed, 250 taken hostage. Israel's response was ferocious. A full-scale ground invasion of Gaza followed. By the end of 2024, over 40,000 Palestinians had been killed, the majority women and children, according to Gaza health authorities. The United Nations called the humanitarian situation catastrophic. A growing number of international legal scholars began using the word genocide. Israel rejected that characterization entirely. The Gaza war accelerated everything. It activated Iran's entire proxy network. It radicalized populations across the region. And it gave Israel's government the political mandate to pursue its enemies, including Iran itself, more aggressively than at any point in its history. Operation Epic Fury. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated military campaign against Iran. Operation Epic Fury. US B-2 stealth bombers struck Iran's ballistic missile facilities. Israeli jets hit targets across all 31 of Iran's provinces. Key sites in Tehran were struck, including the state broadcaster and the historic Golestan Palace, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed, along with multiple senior commanders and officials. The civilian cost has been severe. A U.S.-Israeli airstrike hit a girls' school in southern Iran, killing at least 165 children. Iran retaliated immediately. Drone and missile attacks were launched across the Middle East, hitting the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Iran's Revolutionary Guard declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, one of the most critical oil shipping lanes on the planet. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned the hardest strikes on Iran are yet to come. What comes next? Nobody knows. Will Iran's government survive? Will the Iranian people rise up? Will the Strait of Hormuz stay closed and send global energy prices into freefall? Will this become a full regional war? What we do know is this. Everything happening right now has roots that stretch back over a century, to a collapsing empire, to promises made and broken by colonial powers, to a revolution, to decades of proxy wars, assassinations, and a nuclear standoff that pushed the world to the edge. The bombs are still falling. The fires are still burning. Nobody knows how this ends. But now you know how it started.